Maayad-ayad na nga adlaw kauban. This is Cheryl Ramirez, co-host of the Philippine X and Wellness podcast, and we are happy to bring to you the final episode of Season 4 titled Know Your Immigrant Rights. This is a very challenging time that many of us are navigating within the U.S., and I wanted to introduce not only our co-host for this episode, Sheena Katz, but attorney over immigrant and family law, Cheryl Deptowicz-Diaz of Diaz Law Firm, and Shekinah Deocares, senior organizer of the Pilipino Workers Center, who are our guests for this particular episode. Many of you might be wondering, what are my rights as immigrants or undocumented immigrants tuning in? Or even so, how can I ally with my neighbors, my comadres, my compadres, to practice the value of kapwa within our community? A note on this content, this session includes content around grief, loss, detention, and deportation that may be triggering. We acknowledge that this content may be difficult for our audience and our community, while we encourage you to care for your own safety and well-being when navigating this episode. Please apply boundaries when necessary, pause the episode when you need to, consult with a qualified mental health practitioner or attorney as needed, and feel free to refer to the resources not only within this episode, but also in our Instagram highlights or through the resource directory provided by our partners, Therapy Now. I thank you all for listening and being brave in these difficult times. Makibaka, wag matakot. I hope that you enjoy this episode.
Magandang araw, everyone. Welcome to the final episode of Season 4 for Philippine X and Wellness podcast. Yay, we made it through 4 seasons, and we are continuing on to Season 5 with more health and wellness podcast episodes coming your way. I am one of your hosts, Sheena Katz, and my pronouns are she and her. For this episode's audio description, currently I am wearing a black top, my hair is down, and I'm seated in front of a white wall and a tall green plant behind me. And joining me on today's episode is my co-host, Cheryl Ramirez.
Maayong araw, everyone. My name is Cheryl Ramirez. My pronouns are she, her, siya. And I am tuning in from Tongvalan, also known as Los Angeles. For my audio description, I have long black hair with blue highlights. I have silver headphones over my ears at the moment. I have eyeglasses that are red and white candy cane-like frame. And I'm wearing a black hoodie. In the back, I have wooden slats. Following our last episode, Find Your Healing Frequency with Reiki practitioner and sound bath facilitator Lisa Gonzalez, we'll be discussing community wellness, immigration support, and protection with a Los Angeles-based attorney handling family law and immigration, Cheryl Deptowicz-Diaz of Diaz Law Firm, and senior organizer at Pilipino Workers Center, Shekinah Deocares. As mentioned in previous episodes, all views discussed are for informational and educational purposes only. It's not meant to be medical or legal advice, nor does it constitute therapy or professional advice. Always consult with your healthcare practitioner, lawyer, or therapist before starting any exercise or new health program, or a qualified mental health professional for your particular condition.
So without further ado, we'd like to welcome to our podcast, Cheryl Deptowicz-Diaz and Shekinah Deocares. Welcome to Philippine X and Wellness, ladies.
Happy to be here. Hello, hello. Yeah.
Welcome. So we typically like to open our podcast episodes by getting to know our guests and their lineage. So to your knowledge, where are both sides of your families from and where are you streaming from today?
I can go first. And shall I do the audio description?
Yes, please.
So I'm Cheryl Deptowicz-Diaz. I have long, dark brown hair. I have no makeup on except lipstick. I have long earrings that are several spheres and hoops. They're brown. I'm wearing a black cardigan underneath a mauve color blouse. And I am currently streaming from Covina, California, although I traced my roots all the way to Visayan Islands of the Philippines. Both of my parents are from Cebu, but they eloped to Manila, where all of us 5 kids were born, and then we immigrated to the United States in 1982 in the inner city of Los Angeles. Shekinah?
Hey y'all. Yeah, so I am Shekinah. She, her are my pronouns. Right now I am in Los Angeles, Tongvaland. Born and raised here, but my parents are my dad is from Iloilo, so not far from Cheryl's parents. And my mom is from Pampanga. Um, yeah, in my audio description for today, I have dark brown hair with some feathered bangs and blue headphones covering my ears. I'm wearing a golden chain. I have a yellow shirt on and my black rimmed glasses and a white wall behind me.
Well, thank you both and welcome. Oh my goodness, there's so much to unpack in this episode. So before diving into the topic at hand, share a peek with us into your career pathway. So Cheryl, let's start with you. What were some of the life events that contributed to your career path of becoming an attorney in family and immigration law? And then as a follow-up to Shekinah, what influenced your pursuits of becoming an organizer at Filipino Workers Center?
So this question is actually pretty big for me. It always puts me back to February 2007 when I was sitting in my car outside the testing area about to sit for the 3-day bar exam. To prepare, we needed to be ready to show mastery on 16 law subjects. I was in my car actually crying an hour before, not because of nervousness, though I was that too, but because I felt the pull of my path. I felt my ancestors and also my future children thinking of all that brought me to that moment. I was the middle child of 5 kids born into poverty. We did not have running water in Tayuman, Manila. I was an immigrant child transplanted from Metro Manila to the inner city of Los Angeles. I went to high school of 5,000 students where career day boasted jobs from McDonald's and Burger King, and we were supposed to be excited over that fact. And our sidewalks were lined with homeless and drunk people. So how could I not be an attorney? I only knew one thing, that I had a certain privilege. I had a big enough curiosity to step outside my neighborhood. I had a big enough brain to like challenges and take them on. And I had the command of the English language, and I had a U.S. passport. So these are privileges I knew I couldn't waste. And so here I am, over 17 years later, among the 90,000 active law licenses in California. I trace my long line of legacy to the 35 out of 55 founding fathers who were lawyers when they signed the Declaration, the Constitution, even though our founding documents like the Declaration of Independence called Native American savages and Star Spangled Banner was written by a poet who was a slave owner and called for providing no refuge for slaves, even though our government killed 25,000 Mexicans to steal the Southwest Territory and forced 4,000 Cherokees to walk on foot from Georgia to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. I know these things, I know these history, and so how could I not be an attorney? And that's why I'm an attorney today.
Cheryl, how am I supposed to follow up after that? I'm like, should I become an attorney? Inspired. No, I'm not. I'm not. Um, but I did choose to become an organizer. I think a lot of the same systems that Cheryl is highlighting, I saw in my life. And so I was born here in Los Angeles, like I said earlier, but my parents immigrated here when they were in their 30s. And I grew up in a super diverse, vibrant immigrant community where we were from literally all over the world, all over the map. We spoke different languages, ate different food, but we shared the fact that we were all immigrants in Los Angeles. And I was so blessed to grow up in that atmosphere and trying all of these new things, amazing things, and really just understanding humans as humans and not based on like their ethnicity or their country of origin. What I also was faced with, especially during the Great Recession in 2008, was the fact that our immigrant community is on the front lines of worker exploitation, that our immigrant community is facing systemic barriers in being able to thrive in the US. And my father had worked his whole time in the US for a large corporation, even though he was a professor in the Philippines, became a warehouse worker here in the US because they did not recognize his diploma and all of his experience. Was a warehouse worker, worked his way up, became a manager, and then 6 months later, recession hit and he got fired from his job. And at the same time, my mother, who was a caregiver, got into an accident at work and she ended up having to leave her job because she wasn't able to walk anymore. And she became disabled. And seeing the way that these large corporations weren't giving the unemployment that they were supposed to, or the workers' comp they were supposed to, seeing that we got less from our disability than we were supposed to from the government, and seeing a lot of these functions that we were always been taught, oh, this is like the saving grace for communities, for people. Like these are the institutions you can trust, and seeing them not care for my own parents, and then looking around and saying, oh, my friends and their parents are going through really similar things too. Like this is not isolated. Um, Seeing all of that together created like a fire and an anger in me, but also like activated a deep joy and resilience because my family, we lost our home. Um, we lost our home twice, actually. We got evicted the second time. Um, Again, we didn't have access to a lot of government resources. And throughout all of that, the reason we were sheltered, the reason we had food, the reason we had happiness and joy was because of our friends from church, strangers from church, our neighbors, community members. Like they fought for us. Um, and so witnessing that, I think similar to Cheryl, like there's no way you go through that and then think like, okay, I'm out of this. Like I'm not going to do this work, right? Like we all have such different ways of doing it, and organizing is the way I was drawn in. I want to bring more people into the movement. I want more leaders in the movement. Um, I don't want it to be like, oh, we're doing things for workers, but like workers are doing things for workers. Immigrants are doing things for immigrants, right? They're leading the fight. So that's a little bit about my background.
I think that having this episode and just really listening to you both and your backgrounds is just a timely episode to bring on. I know when we were crafting this episode, I was being asked, well, what does knowing your immigrant rights have to do with wellness? And also, as a daughter of immigrants, my father actually was a political prisoner who immigrated here during a time where the Marcos regime was in the government in the Philippines. I can't just help but follow suit in how I was raised. And when it comes to immigrant rights, to me, it has to do with wellness, even if I was born here as a citizen, um, my wellness is a part of the whole, and that's the idea of kapwa. And so in listening to you, Cheryl D, refer to also the history of those that came before us, it's important to also know that our immigrant population was able to come here to the US at the as a result of the civil rights movement, and to note that this history existed in a time where it's attempting to be erased, or the attempts of it are to erase it, is really important to name and powerful in itself. So thank you, Cheryl, for giving us that context. Now, when we talk about community wellness and allyship, it's also important at the core of launching this particular episode, because we mentioned when we were doing our resources post that kapwa, one of our core values is about seeing ourselves in others and embracing a shared identity. That's just on the riding on the tailcoats of what you just mentioned, Cheryl. So we are facing these difficult, challenging times that are not only affecting our neighbors, but are impacting our community directly. Shekinah, can you provide us with a backdrop of the workers you work with at Pilipino Workers Center? And let's personalize this as how they're currently being impacted by the detention and deportation orders of this current political climate.
Yeah. So when the election results came out last November, our organizers received about 4,000 calls and text messages within the first week of just, I'm afraid, I don't know what to do. Can I go buy groceries? Like, can I do the basic things I need to do to survive, basically, still? Uh, and not being sure if it was safe for them to do that. And I think that's a feeling that a lot of folks outside of our PWC membership feel too, right? PWC is about 700 members strong, and our members represent the Filipino community in Southern California, particularly our caregiving community. We know that we have a lot of Filipino folks that go into caregiving as an industry. We have a lot of folks who came here not by choice, not because it was ideal or a fun vacation or just like their country of choice to live in, but because they needed a living wage job, and that's hard to get back home in the Philippines, or because they were farmers and there's so much flooding and intensity of the climate crisis that makes it difficult for them to do that work there. We work with a lot of folks who actually got labor trafficked coming here. They were promised one thing by a corporation. What they received was something else. And a lot of times these employers say, oh, like, we're going to keep your documents with us, and we're going to pay you really poorly and make you work a lot. And if you complain or if you try to leave, we will call ICE and we will deport you. And so all of these are compounding threats. We're seeing workers' rights are under attack, renters' rights are under attack, and people are weaponizing status in order to do that and to continue exploitation. And so we have a lot of workers that are impacted that way. But what I also want to share is it has been amazing to see that even in all of like the fear mongering that they're dealing with, right, and seeing on a day-to-day basis, all of the news that comes out, that's like quite frankly frightening, that at the same time our members are, oh, how can we volunteer? How can we make sure our neighbors know their rights? How can we give out these know your rights cards so that as many people, our coworkers, know what their rights are? How can we, even during the fires in Los Angeles, right? They were like, oh, how can we go out and support that? We want to volunteer, we want to help. I think that's kapwa, like that's exactly what you were sharing about earlier. And so in sharing like all of the things they have to face, I also wanted to make sure to share the resilience that's so deeply ingrained, and the joy and the kindness that they choose to hang on to, even through all of this. But also, I think there's like a huge myth out there that Filipinos are not impacted by these new deportation orders and this threat on our immigrant community, and that's just simply not true. There are already Filipino folks that have been detained and have been deported. Um, but also, like this current administration, just because I look the way I look, puts me on notice to them. Like they see that as a threat, right? And so I think that's important to remember, not to like freak everyone out, right? But so that we can share that information and be prepared as a community, and also be prepared in solidarity with our other communities, right? Right? So, yeah.
I really appreciate you bringing face and bringing that to the forefront. I think because a lot of what may be publicized in the news that we've seen has focused mainly on the Latino, Latinx, Latine community. But we also have to remember that we're not, again, the model minority, and what we're facing in these detention and deportation orders is also impacting us. And this is where we bring you in, Cheryl D. Being that you're currently practicing family and immigration law, what kinds of changes are you also experiencing as it relates to family and immigration law in the present time?
Yes, so actually, there's a lot going on. As Shekinah already mentioned, that within, even before Trump 2.0 administration was formally active on Inauguration Day of January 20th, there was already a lot of activities, a lot of plans were leaked. And so, right off the jump, we've seen a lot of activities. We've seen a bunch of executive orders. We've seen challenges to birthright citizenship, which means that if you were born inside U.S. territory, you are automatically a U.S. citizen. He's challenging that. There have been a lot of threats that ICE will come on to public schools and the school system and all of those things. And so what I want to focus on is, and even just over the weekend, this past weekend, allegedly that different executive orders combined to fire a bunch of immigration judges, especially some of the more friendly ones, because their denial rate is public information. So the ones with lower denial rates are targeted. And also hundreds of USCIS staff members were also fired over the weekend. And so while many are of the executive orders and these campaigns and projects are being challenged in court cases as we speak, it's different to know not really what they're about, but what is the purpose of these executive orders. Because many of them will take time, money, infrastructure, and human power to actually carry out. So for right now, really, their purpose is to scare us, to send us into a tailspin and create chaos amongst us. And yes, if put into place every single executive order, we can expect a whole bunch of things, and I'm just going to thumbnail through them. We can expect expansion of immigration enforcement, meaning ICE raids, longer application processing times for those that have valid applications and qualify for different benefits under the Immigration Act. We can expect stricter rules to qualify for these immigration benefits. We can expect larger denial rates some of this we know because of Trump 1.0, where the denial rate skyrocketed between 70 to 80, 85% of all the applications. Higher filing fees, we can expect that. We also saw that in Trump 1.0. We can expect removal of judicial discretion, where it's up to the judge to kind of really assess each person's application or defense. We can expect more loss of due process, like quicker removals, no hearings, more pressure on sanctuary states and cities to cave in and cooperate with law enforcement. So they will be tested to see if they will participate and cooperate. We can expect more detention centers. We can expect that safe spaces, traditionally held safe spaces like schools and churches, hospitals, and courthouses, to be tested. Right now, California is at the forefront of that, where our own California Supreme Court justice has stated in the past that courthouses are sacred grounds to protect equal access to justice. And Trump is saying that he's not going to honor any of that. We can expect more family separation, so like the ending of task force that have the sole responsibility of reuniting families that were separated upon being apprehended at the border. We can expect more fake or forced labels like designated organizations as terrorists or criminals or cartels to further dehumanize them, to further legitimize their removal of more and more due process. We can expect harder asylum process, like when they shut down the CBP One app, which was an app that was scheduling folks waiting for their turn to have their interview for their asylum application. It was just shut down overnight. We can also expect increased militarization of borders, so that there's a feeling of war in the air, shutting down of different humanitarian parole programs, suspension of refugee programs. These are treaties that we've signed, saying that we honor refugee applications and asylum applications, and so just to suspend them. And we can expect an end to deferred action programs like DACA. And this is what we can expect and already seeing. And just know the purpose is to shock and awe. It's really meant to make us throw up our hands and give up. It's meant to divide and conquer. And already it's working, because we know, for example, California is a progressive state. And in February 2021, there was a 78% approval rate for the immigrant population, seeing immigrants as a net benefit to our society. That 78% approval has gone down 66% to 66% in June 2023, and even further to 60% in February 2024. And as what Shekinah and you, Cheryl, was saying about Filipinos are not immune to any of this. Yes, it's true that more than 50% of the undocumented population is from Mexico. There's about 350 to 500,000, depending on who's counting. In February, news outlet Balita News, I believe, counted it as 500,000 undocumented Filipinos. And California is home to almost half of the undocumented Filipino population. And so, and as an attorney who does deportation defense and removal defense, I see in courts Filipino respondents facing these charges. And so presently, yes, my clients, like Shekinah's, worker population, are seeing panic. We are too, but don't forget, the antidote to panic and fear is information and action. And we'll talk more about that later.
Thank you for sharing that data with us, the executive orders, and also what's happening in this current climate. It's important to note, and I want to mention to our community on the timeline, just because this episode is airing in March, we're currently recording on President's Day, February 20th. So just so you know, when this episode airs, there might be some things that, in regards to data, that have been updated. You mentioned a couple of acronyms, and I'm going to differentiate Cheryl Deptowicz-Diaz as Cheryl D, since I'm also Cheryl. You mentioned a couple of acronyms, Cheryl D. So you said US, I believe, CIS and USCDP. Can you explain to our community what those acronyms stand for?
Yes, I apologize for that.
It's okay.
USCIS stands for United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. They handle the affirmative applications if you're, especially if you're inside of the United States. And they handle family petitions, requests for an affirmative asylum, those kinds of things. And then U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, they are charged with protecting the border.
CBP, okay, yes.
And then there's ICE, which is Immigrant and Citizenship Enforcement, Customs Enforcement. So they're the police arm of immigration.
Got it.
They do the raids. And then I also mentioned DACA, which is Deferred Action for Children, Childhood Arrivals. And that's a program that's been around. It has been put on pause, but if you had DACA in the past, you could still renew it. You just can't do a new application. And that was meant for children, for people who came here as a child, been living in the United States. There's a whole bunch of requirements to it. But for the people who have DACA, it defers any action against you to deport you or remove you. So while it doesn't give you a green card, it does allow you to live and work here and go to school here in the meantime until we can figure out a path for your legalization, right? But those kinds of programs are being threatened right now, along with different programs like different humanitarian parole. Some population are here because maybe they had an earthquake back home, maybe there was a fire back home, and we took them in on a temporary basis. So a lot of these programs are being ended, or in the works of being ended.
I see. Yeah, and I wanted to correct my dates. I said earlier February 20th. We're filming on February 17th. I don't know if you both have heard, but given that this is Monday, February 17th, there was some recent news about New York City's mayor being compliant with the demands of the Trump administration towards immigrants and the concern for immigrant safety now in New York City. Being that New York City is also a sanctuary city that many other sanctuary cities are looking towards as also maybe something that might trickle down to their cities. I'm wondering if you have any opinions on that and how it might impact a sanctuary city like Los Angeles.
I personally think that it doesn't bode well for sanctuary cities, although I do believe that California would probably fight it a lot more. If California was to cave in to the pressure, I think we would see it farther down the line than New York has caved, right? And I don't know the details of that. I was being a mom this weekend at my son's volleyball tournament, but I think California is different in certain ways. I had consumed all news outlets during the general election in November and watched news from all over, and I know that California took a stronger stance against Trump than New York did. And I also know that here in California, our political leaders, our elected officials, have a lot of immigrant roots. Our Attorney General, Rob Bonta, for example, there was and a lot of local elections have Filipino leaders who have Filipino roots, so I think that we would, and immigrant roots. And so I think that we would make a stronger stand than New York. That's my own personal opinion.
I'm hoping so. We have such a rich history in this state when it comes to protesting and civil rights, right? So I'm hoping that we follow that legacy. Thank you for that, Cheryl. Shekinah, do you want to weigh in on that, or you think Cheryl's got that for you?
Yeah, no, that was great. I will add quickly, I think that sanctuary ordinances are tangibly helpful, right? It makes immigration enforcement a lot harder because it keeps our local and our state departments and agencies from collaborating with ICE, and that has real impacts. And I am very much hoping that California and our local governments do not cave in the same way that Eric Adams did. And I have hope in that. But I do want to add that even if they did, right, even if they did, we're seeing that so much of the protection right now is coming from people just knowing their rights. And so even if that does happen, like, I don't want people to be like, it's over, we're done for. I know that the ICE director said a few weeks ago in an interview, he was talking about their plans for ICE raids. And he's like, well, getting our quotas have been really hard recently because all of these immigrants know their rights. Like, they all have these red cards on them that say what their rights are. And so they're not as easy to arrest and detain. And that was, first of all, hilarious to me because just seeing how stumped they were by that, and also how angry they got. Like, how dare these people know what their rights are and advocate for their rights? But it's so critical. So not to give away the plot, but I'm excited that Cheryl D is going to share some of those know your rights information. And not to diminish the power of the sanctuary ordinances, people fought for those. It has real impacts. It is helpful and it's like an added barrier. But just wanted to share, like, we have different pieces of armor on. And even if they chip away at one, like, we're ready to strengthen the other pieces.
Wow, you're so positive, Shekinah, in this really difficult climate. And first of all, I just wanted to thank you both for being on this episode. It takes a lot of courage and advocacy during these challenging times to really speak on this topic. We're talking about knowing your immigrant rights and really defining what those rights look like for our immigrant communities. And Cheryl, being that you are an attorney for family and immigration law, what are the rights of undocumented immigrants if ICE were to show up to their car, their door, even if they're just walking down the street? I know those are different scenarios, and so I'm wondering if there's also different approaches based on where you are when ICE approaches you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And this is the time to lead in power and not in panic, right? And an informed community is a community that is difficult to target, as Shekinah was alluding to earlier. And that's why it's so important to know your basic rights. And that's why I had agreed to come on to this podcast. And what I want people to know is that um, don't let this be the last time you learn about your basic rights. Do it so many times that it's seared into your mind. Do it, attend so many that you know so much that you can share it with your household, with your coworkers, with others. Because, like I said earlier, their plan is to scare us. But the antidote to fear and fatigue is information and action. And focus on the key words here of information and action being together. Because the information I'm about to give you, you must do something with it. This is not just information you receive. This is information you share, discuss with your family and your trusted attorney, and more importantly, to practice. Because you may get this information, and it's one thing to know your rights, but it's another to actually assert your rights. And it's hard to do that, asserting your rights, when ICE agents on purpose are trying to take them away, on purpose trying to scare you, on purpose will do anything so that you make the wrong decision or make the wrong steps that takes your rights away. So let's go over two major considerations right now. There's your basic legal rights that I'm going to talk about, and then there's the common sense things you should also know about. So first, the legal rights. And whether you're encountering ICE at your home, at your car, in school, at work, or out on the streets, the basic approach is the same, because sorry, I'm going to be referring to my notes to make sure, because the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution are all going to combine to make sure that you have due process, meaning that you are aware of your rights, that you do not help the investigators investigate you. These are basic rights. It doesn't matter whether you have immigration papers or not, that you have lawful status or not. These are enshrined in our Constitution, and everybody who is facing law enforcement, and ICE, it's an arm of law enforcement, are afforded these rights. And so you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to refuse to sign documents. You have the right to refuse to give documents. You have the right against searches and seizures without a judicial warrant. So, for example, and of course, you have a right to hire an attorney at your own cost. If this was a criminal case, a public defender is maybe available if you can't afford an attorney. But in immigration world, in immigration court, for you to have an attorney, you have to be able to hire your own. And so all of these rights, the most important thing is, first of all, ICE can do an expedited removal, meaning quickly deport you if you cannot establish residency in the United States for at least 2 years, right? But they also cannot remove or deport you if they cannot establish that you are not a U.S. citizen. So don't help them with any information. Don't give them information that they can then use against you to build their case against you. So this means staying quiet about where you're from. And you might say, Cheryl, this is only going to freaking piss them off. Yeah, it will. Yeah, it will. But it's your right to remain silent. Stay calm. Do not run away. Do not resist, because that can be a separate charge. And be neutral. So, don't antagonize, but Also, don't be overly accommodating. Don't volunteer any questions. Even when they keep asking the question over and over and over again. And they're going to do their best to get you talking. Stay quiet. Do not fall for it. They are allowed to lie to you to get you talking. Don't do it. Don't fall for it. They're allowed to lie to you to get you to sign a document that maybe says that you agree to be deported, to be removed. That happened recently in January, in the middle of us having this freaking wildfire storm in California. ICE was over in Bakersfield, and some of my clients were caught up in that, where they came on very close to the agricultural fields. And they were told that they took their phones, their cell phones, and they said, and their bags, we'll give these things to you if you just sign here. And this is just a document that says we're returning this to you. And they signed it, and within 2 hours, they're no longer in the United States. They were taken to Mexico, and some of them were not even from Mexico, right? So don't sign for anything. They're allowed to lie to you. And so that's the most important thing. Now, if they're coming to your home, they cannot enter your home without a judicial warrant that is signed by a judge. Sometimes they come in showing you a warrant, but it's an ICE warrant. An ICE warrant doesn't count. So it has to be from the judge. And number two, you do not have to cooperate. You do not open the door to your home. I had a client who was holding his home, and they sat at his front door banging and banging and banging for half an hour. And I tell him, let them bang on the door. If they can't produce that judicial warrant signed by a judge, you do not have to open that door. And my tip to my clients is have them slide it under the door. You read it to me, you call your attorney, and we review, you send a picture of it to me and we review it. And in the meantime, I'm on my way over there, right, to help you deal with this, because the only time I'm going to recommend you speak to an ICE agent is when you have your attorney right there with you. In fact, even when your attorney is there with you, you're not even doing the talking. Your attorney is doing the talking. Okay? And so, where are you from? I assert my right to remain silent. Where were you born? I assert my right to remain silent. What is your nationality? I assert my right to remain silent. Will they be pissed? Yes, they will. But if they want to take you, they're going to take you anyway. Don't make it easy for them to build a case against you, because they cannot deport you if they cannot prove that you're not a U.S. citizen. But if you give them your wallet that has the consulate card that says you're from the Philippines or you're from Mexico, you help them out. You shouldn't have given them your wallet, because like a car or your personal belonging, ICE is not allowed to search your car or personal belongings without a warrant signed by a judge. And they're going to ask you, do you consent to these searches? No. Why are you going to consent to these searches? Because what they're doing is trying to get information on you to build a case against you to deport you. Don't make it easy for them. Have them work for it. They will say all kinds of stuff. What are you hiding? If you don't have anything to hide, you would let us search. If you're not a criminal, you would cooperate. And all of a sudden, you're like, I am a good person. I have nothing to hide. Go ahead and search. Big mistake. Red flag. Do not do it. And then if you're stopped while driving, please, oh please, be sure you have a valid driver's license. We come from a state where we do have AB6 that allows you to have a driver's license, even though you're undocumented, because driving without a valid license is a misdemeanor. And now you would be facing a misdemeanor charge, which would complicate your removal defense. If you're stopped at the streets, the same thing. Do not run, do not resist, do not say anything. What's your name? I assert my right to remain silent. If stopped at school. So recently we heard a lot of headlines about ICE trying to come on to the schools, and a lot of kids were missing school, affecting the school's budget because a child's absence means no federal funds for the day for that child. And so the only thing I can tell you about all of that, it's not lawful for ICE to come on to the school and try to take a child away, to try and interview a child. Only parents and their designated people can take a child from school. So ICE has no authority to take your child to another room, out of the school or anything. And yes, we know why they're doing this, because they're after the parents. And for them to be using little kids like this and minor children in this way is despicable and speaks to their policy. Now, if ICE is in jail, or you're in jail or prison and ICE is trying to come on and talk to you, you have the right to decline the interview. You can say, I don't want to talk to you. You can say, I will only talk to you when my attorney is present. I'm asserting my right to remain silent. So those are some, I didn't talk about the Worksite. So the Worksite is, if you work for a private company, again, ICE has no business coming onto the Worksite, the private Worksite, if they do not have a warrant signed by judge. They're allowed to come onto the public areas of a Worksite. So for example, if you work for a grocery store, they can be in the store, but not in the back room, not in the stock room, not in the office, not in the break room. And the business owner can actually ask them to leave. And you can calmly walk away. You don't have to stay put. You can go to the private areas, and you don't have to assist them and chaperone them to go find the person who is the target for that moment. Because supposedly they're coming in to target a criminal or whatever, or somebody with a criminal past. I have two thoughts on that. Number one, some of the people that they're targeting may have been criminals in the past, but I know for a fact with some of my clients, they've already paid their dues and they have already served their sentence full out. Like, I have one client who did serve in state prison for, well, I don't want to say, but a long time. But he served his time and he was released. There were no issues with his incarceration. And the only reason why he is still considered a criminal is because he's not a U.S. citizen or he's not here lawfully. Otherwise, he would have already been forgiven by our society, as we're supposed to do after somebody serves their time. And the second part about that is, even if they are targeting a criminal, they also on purpose will search for this person in a very populated area, because they're meant to also grab everybody else around them. Okay, so it's fake. It's a ruse for them to say we're only targeting criminals. And so I was saying that the business owner can ask ICE to leave. And then again, if they do not have a warrant, the business does not have to participate or cooperate with them. And I've gone on for a while, but there's the common sense approach. You let me know if I should talk on that or not.
Well, what is that one?
That's different things like memorize someone's emergency number or contact information.
That's important.
I'll see if I can go fast. So do your best to not even have to encounter ICE. If you do not have to leave your house, don't leave your house, right? If you are seeing a fight, walk away. Do not watch in intrigue. Do not watch in like this is your telenovela. Go ahead and leave because police will come. And if police are there, ICE may or may not soon follow, right? Or they may or may not be called. You see a crowd of drunk people, get out of there. Don't drink and drive. Don't do anything that will put you in the criminal justice system, because that is the number one pipeline to removal. The biggest access, the reason why we have almost 39,000 detained immigrants in immigration detention center, the majority of that came from the criminal pipeline. And it could be for something very, very simple, like driving without a license because you're here undocumented and you can't get a license. But now all of a sudden you're in the pipeline and all of a sudden you're in immigration. And then finally, for lack of time, have a family preparedness plan. What does your family need if you are detained by ICE? What is your child care plan? Where are your important documents? If they're not already with your attorney, they need to be, or they need to be with a trusted person that has lawful status. You might want to think about having a caregiver affidavit so that in your absence, your child can attend school, keep going to school because they're under that person's care. You might want to think about having a power of attorney given to somebody to access your bank account or your funds, or to make decisions over your property in case you're not here and your children that are still here needs those funds or need those properties.
Wow, so much. I thank you for going through the legal rights very thoroughly, Cheryl. I had some follow-up questions that popped into my mind as you were going through them. So for someone that doesn't have a lawyer present, right? How would they differentiate between a judge's warrant and an ICE warrant?
So it would just say ICE on it, and then it would specifically tell you who the judge, what courthouse, those kinds of things.
Okay. And can an innocent bystander or someone, let's say one of us is shopping in a grocery market and we see ICE agents coming in, can we also step to the ICE agent and tell them to leave, or does that have to be done by the manager of the store?
I don't think that, I mean, that's a tough one, right? Because I love the fighting spirit. I would hope that you would get if you were to do that, let them know that they're not welcome here, maybe even to start recording. You want to make sure that you have lawful status, that you're not putting yourself at risk. Those kinds of things are best left for people who do have lawful status. That is one way they can really be a great ally. But no, don't interfere in that way, but you can record from afar without getting in the way of and that's enough to put pressure. And of course, I've seen it where if there's enough of you guys to start chanting from afar, but loud enough to be able to say, whatever it is, like what you're doing is wrong. ICE is not welcome here. Immigrant rights are human rights, whatever, to kind of like let them know that they are being watched, that we are taking account, and to just put a little bit of pause to whatever hype and mania they were about to go on.
This also brings up a lot of issues around profiling, right? There are a lot of people that I also know that are citizens, yet I'm getting out. So now do I have to carry out my papers even though I'm a citizen? I don't know if either of you want to talk about that.
So I think that so my husband is from Mexico. He came here undocumented when he was just 6 months old. And his experience is very different from mine, even though we both came here as child immigrants. When Trump 1.0 started, he was very, very triggered in a way that was different from me. And then now the 2.0, even more so than before, because his experience is different. People treat him differently. And so even though he's now a U.S. citizen, he still is so traumatized from his childhood that he does believe, and we do act like any of us can be a target. Even though I'm light-skinned Filipina, I could be targeted just as much because I'm not blonde hair, blue eyed, which of them is acceptable. Even though I have a bunch of European clients who are here undocumented, and so who are just as nervous about all of this. I would say not just as nervous, but they're calling me too, and so, so I think that there is a risk that citizens and green card holders, permanent residents, can be taken up. We saw some of that in the recent raids. There were U.S. citizens who were also deported, removed from the United States, and it can happen. And also Native Americans were also picked up in all of that. And so, yeah, if you have something that says that you are a U.S. citizen, by all means, carry it and all of that. Now, if you are not a U.S. citizen, please do not carry that fake document, because that would be an additional charge that would complicate your removal defense because impersonating a U.S. citizen when you're not is one of the biggest sin in immigration.
You mentioned, I was at Bakersfield where they were confiscated cell phones. So that's all allowed basically, or how do you, I don't know, how do you navigate around that?
Yeah, once they get their hands on it and they're not supposed to,
yes,
they could return it to you and just say, oops, sorry, but you can go ahead and trust that they've already downloaded whatever is in there. And actually, one of my common sense tips that I forgot about was go ahead and empty out your cell phone data and leave only bare minimum in there, because they could, even not for immigration purposes, when traveling, I'll be traveling shortly next week, and I want to empty out my phone because for whatever reason, if they search it, I don't want them to know anything. They could at international ports of entry. But ICE is not supposed to, without a warrant, get those things. But do they? Yes. And will they download everything in your phone? Yes. Yeah.
Wow. And local law enforcement, I know that are they working alongside ICE at this time in different cities? I know, for example, I've heard that when ICE shows up at schools, some of the protocol is to at times contact school police. So I'm just wondering, are they pushing back or are they partnering? Do we know?
I'm seeing news where some of them are participating or part of the talks, because the rumor mill, and again, it's all rumors, and please don't take it as true, but act accordingly or take it with a grain of salt, is that there is supposed to be a round of raids in the LA area that before the close of February.
Right.
And supposedly the plan around all of that the cops have, local law enforcement have been part of the discussion. How much they're cooperating, who knows? But that they are in those groups.
Okay.
So, Shekinah, on the PWC website, there are also resources on getting prepared, the basics and online safety and security tips, which is coming soon. Can you share a preview and summary of these particular resources? What do they typically cover?
Yeah, so quick plug, go to pwcsc.org and you can find some Know Your Rights resources there. And we're working on making them available in both English and Tagalog. But for those specific resources, a lot of it Cheryl actually just covered too. So when it comes to the family preparedness planning, Know Your Rights is our first line of defense, right? But what happens if you are detained? And so making sure folks have their information in order. A friend said this to me earlier today. They said, if you fail to prepare, then prepare to fail. And it's silly, but there's truth to it, right? It's better to be prepared in these scenarios. And so making sure that you have all of necessary documents in order and accessible if you have children or if you're a caregiver or if you're caring for an elder in your family, emergency contacts so that those people can still be cared for even if you are detained. Having an emergency contact number that you memorize, so if you're detained, you know who to call, right? And so covering all of those things. And then for our safety and security tips, that will be going over just some resources on how we can be as safe as possible and also make it more difficult for ICE to access our private information that can be used against us, right? So just to be clear, there's no 100%, this is the plan and you'll be safe and secure and there's no way ICE can access your information. I wish that existed. It doesn't, but there are steps we can take to make it more difficult for ICE to access these things. So we'll be going over that. Some really quick things I can share right now that folks can do right now is, apps like Facebook Messenger, Instagram. A lot of the data you're sharing there is more accessible to ICE and to subpoenas because these corporations have complied, right? And so using Signal can be a safer messaging app to use. Not texting sensitive information, right? Removing your Face ID and fingerprint password. So if they do that scenario that was talked about earlier, let's say ICE just takes your phone, even though you told them that you don't want them to do that, making it harder for them to access it because they can't just put your finger on it or use Face ID to open up your phone. So sharing some of those tips and also how to sort through misinformation. The misinformation right now is wild and stronger than ever, and especially with AI, there's so much going on, and a lot of it is causing panic, and a lot of it is also divisive, right? The rhetoric Cheryl D talked about earlier of you only have to worry if you're a criminal. That's just not true. And we've already seen so many cases of that, she shared. And then also just wanted to share, when we're talking about safety and security tips, I think there's also this idea that ICE is this all-knowing, all-powerful, if I give my information to anything, if I sign up for anything, ICE will know about it. And now under Trump, they are becoming more resourced, but they are not all knowing. They are not all powerful. And And so it's just knowing like what are the things that we should avoid, but also like having a peace of mind in knowing that they can't access everything, right? Yeah.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And because you work with so many workers directly as a senior organizer, can you share with us, what are some of their current wellness needs? And in the same token, how are some of those needs being addressed?
I think folks just really need people they can grieve with and then also be in power with. Like, it really is just having people and not being isolated. Because of things like ICE uses tactics like getting informants. So people from the community who will then inform, right, other people who might be undocumented. And those tactics are used to divide, they're used to sow mistrust within the community. And they happen, but I think it's also on the other side of that, we see how people who are connected to community are able to assert their rights. We see people connected to community protecting one another, right? Whether or not they have status, like being there for one another. And so I think being able to hold on to that, and to be wise, of course, right? But also just being in community, be there for your friends, for your family, for your coworkers, and just like living life with them, because it can be so hard to just live like under these conditions. And so being able to do that. At PwC, some specific things we're doing are the Know Your Rights trainings, right? That's one way to help them feel more secure and more safe. But other things that we're going to start up soon, we're actually going to start this thing we call Kwentuhan circles. And so it's just a space for people to share like how they're doing and learn about how others are doing and how they're dealing with the situation. And then just having like even our silly community events, whether it's picnics, karaoke, at our office, like those things seem so silly, but they actually like, it reminds us of why we're here and what we're fighting for. And also that we're not isolated. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. And speaking of which, let's actually talk about allyship. So what can we as everyday people in our community do to advocate, support, and ally with undocumented immigrants at risk within our families and neighborhoods? I know you mentioned a couple of examples, Shekinah, so why don't we start with you with some other ones and then proceed with Cheryl.
Yeah, I said this like 30 times already, but I'm going to say it again because it's so important. Like, literally knowing your rights, right? So even if you have status, like regardless of what your status is, you should know the rights that Cheryl D just went over. We've seen so many cases where folks who have status were able to be a barrier between ICE agents and folks who do not have status. They were able to assert those rights on their behalf, right? And so using that privilege, learning how to, not just know what those rights are, but then assert them. So what to do in situations where you do see someone. Cheryl D mentioned earlier, recording. Like recording can help someone's legal case. It also helps the community know what tactics ICE is using. And then some other things are in situations where there are ICE raids is non-compliance, but in a way that's safe. And so this is really up to each individual. But for example, there's a workplace raid, right? Let's say 10 folks there have documents, maybe 2 or 3 folks don't have documents, right? So if ICE comes in and says, hand me your documents now, and the folks with documents are like, okay, I will hand my documents because I just want to get out of this situation. I want to show that I'm documented. They give it to ICE, and then there's 3 people who are refusing. That puts eyes on them, right? That puts a target on them. And so again, like there is not necessarily like a right or wrong in that situation. Like it makes sense that you would just want to be like, yes, I have the proof, I will show it to you. But it is also your right to withhold that, to not show it, so that ICE doesn't target specific people. And then also, like, if ICE comes into a space and then all of a sudden a bunch of people bring out their Know Your Rights red cards and start saying, I have the right to remain silent, like that solidarity is power. So really, like, knowing your rights and then practicing how to assert them. Come to our Know Your Rights trainings at PwC. We'll host them in person and also on Zoom, and practice those things.
Yeah, it's a question that has been popping up a lot in lots and lots of, because there are lots of good people who want to do something about this. And, they have compassion, and they might have lawful status here, but they don't agree with these heavy tactics that our current administration is doing. And so some of them are asking, where do we donate? So donating is an easy one if you've got money to spare, or if you've got money that you can spare for now and make up later. Consider donating to organizations who are fighting some of these executive orders, like the ACLU, like PwC, and other places that are defending immigrant rights. One of my favorite organizations is the ILRC, Immigrant Legal Resource Center. And so that there's that. And then obviously assess your privileges and use them accordingly. We've talked about, serving as a translator for someone who wants to go meet an attorney who might not speak their language. I have a client, I speak Tagalog and Spanish, but I have a client who's from Vietnam and they don't speak Vietnamese. I don't speak Vietnamese, and we need a translator. And then also just know that always understand and highlight the fact that what they're doing here is to dehumanize and to other a set of people on purpose, to divide and conquer and to distract and to scapegoat. And also now is the time to really embrace your brothers and sisters from all walks of life, from all love persuasion, from all different backgrounds. Meaning now is the time to build alliances with everyone affected. We're all going to need each other. This isn't just a Latino issue or a Filipino issue. This is a democracy issue. This is a human rights issue. This is an internationalism issue. What we do here in the United States, it's so critical because of our influence in other countries. If we fail here, we fail everywhere. And so it is so important for us to get this right. And that means really building bridges with one another. And then I do believe that I can't remember the name of the organization, but maybe I can get it to you later. There will be a specific bystander intervention training. That training started during the pandemic with Asian Pacific Islanders who were being targeted for hate crimes because we were being blamed for COVID. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot that of bystanders being able to intervene safely. And there's an organization that is doing bystander intervention training for this scenario. And then I just want to also highlight that if you're going to protest, you want to protest safely. And I know that's not very militant of me, but I don't want you to have to add to the roles of people we're bailing out or having to defend or having to have a court case about, So protest loudly, protest visibly, but protest safely to where you're not caught up in that. And also because if there is some uh, vandalism or some violence that happens, they only always turn it around against us to have more onerous, more heavy handed policies against safe protest. And so I just want to keep that in mind because remember, they're anxious to fill all the detention beds, both in the criminal prison industrial complex, but also the immigration detention centers. And I think those are my things for what everyday people can do for allyship.
Thank you for mentioning all of that, though, Cheryl, because right now it's not just an attack on immigrant communities. There are a lot of attacks on our trans communities. There's a lot of attacks on our older senior communities, our low-income communities. And so it's really important if you're listening to this and we're really talking about allyship, is to really stand united in all these fronts. I sigh because it's just so much. And then Shekinah, also PWC, Filipino Workers Center, you also have a chapter in San Diego, right? So are you also sharing and disseminating the same information at your San Diego base?
Yeah, so we've been doing our Know Your Rights trainings are open to everyone. Our San Diego staff have been giving out the Know Your Rights cards, which if folks are interested in getting Know Your Rights cards, you can find them on our website, and they are provided by one of the organizations Cheryl D mentioned earlier, ILRC, creates those, and they're free too. I heard that some folks are trying to sell those and actually make money off of selling it. It is free information, and we want it to be as accessible as possible. You can get it online for free too. Yeah, so those are some things we're doing in San Diego as well.
And I also wanted to thank you for mentioning that. Go back to what Cheryl D was mentioning about protesting safely. We have an episode that I would like to recommend to our community. We had interviewed Kalayaan Mendoza, who's based in New York, who talks a lot about safety tips when you're protesting. So please check out that episode with Kalayaan Mendoza. Shekinah, talking about the red cards, do you also offer them in Bisaya, or do you know anyone that also offers them in Ilocano, since those are also major dialects in our community?
I don't believe there's any group that offers them right now, but I'm really glad you brought that up because I think that's something we can work on actually, is getting those translated in those dialects.
Awesome. Cool. So if you're listening out there and are an agency that provides the red cards, some things to consider. I know, Cheryl, you're also talking about the bystander trainings. I believe it was Asian Americans advocating for justice. If I'm not wrong in that name, sorry. That also did the bystander training. So look out for organizations that do that. For both of you, with Diaz Law Firm and Pilipino Workers Center, do you have upcoming trainings that you haven't mentioned that you want to add for our community to take advantage of, or other resources other than what has already been mentioned that you'd like our community to learn about? And let's start with Shekinah and then move to Cheryl on this one.
So again, we have our Know Your Rights trainings, and you can see the schedule for that on our social media. We post when we have those on Zoom, and then we're working on doing some in person as well. Other things that we offer at PWC, so we actually have an emergency hotline phone number. So if you encounter ICE, if you see someone encountering ICE, if someone, or if you are detained, even if you see like anti-immigrant attacks from other civilians, you can call this phone number. Again, it's 24/7. The staff that are picking up the phone um, have language capacity in English and in Tagalog. And it is like a secure, confidential phone call. But basically, that staff will then connect to our rapid response network, which is made up of trained volunteers who are part of other community organizations beyond just PWC, who have been trained on how to safely verify ICE sightings, how to support community members, what to do in those situations. And we're also connected to some attorneys as well. So if there are folks who aren't represented right now or have had difficulty finding representation, that's something that we can support with too. So that's one of our major resources. Another thing, again, red cards. You can sign up for those and get them mailed to you on our website online.
For us, well, we're a full-fledged functioning law firm. And so we're fielding calls left and right. And we actually got such a deluge of calls and concerns, not just from our current clients, but also potential new clients. And so we're actually having a internal webinar for our clients to go over their rights, to go over all of their questions. Their questions are all being submitted to me ahead of time, top of mind concerns that they have, because part of my job really is to make sure that my clients feel safe, that they have information, and that they can make good decisions on their behalf and on the behalf of their family. And we will be recording that. And so then we'll splice it up and we'll put it on our social media. And I know I have always said that of all the attorneys out there in the world, I believe there's 190,000 in the US, for example. The ones with the biggest hearts are immigration attorneys. And so my colleagues and I are constantly in communication with each other. There's so much work to go around that there's no competition or anything like that. And so we do know that providing this Know Your Rights workshop, repeating them over and over again is one thing that we can do, because as highlighted previously, an informed community is a community that's hard to target. And we want to set the example of that here in California, especially Southern California. And so my colleagues and I are constantly doing these things, and we'll be doing more of them. You can always get more information by connecting on social media or also on our website, which I'll give later on at the appropriate time. And then just helping people with their consultations, come make a consultation with an attorney. If you can't afford the consultation fees, there are nonprofit organizations. Unfortunately, I have a family to feed. I am for profit, but I do have a slate of cases for pro bono cases, and they're already all taken up, and it's only just February because there's such a big need for it. And that's where donations come in, to help fund people's consultations to get the information that they need, because the panic and the chaos that are completely intentional is creating a vacuum for Notario fraud.
Mhm.
Fraud, consumer fraud, where the consumers are getting advice from non-attorneys. And having done this work long enough for over 17 years, I know that the work of these notarios are notoriously bad, and people pay them out of desperation. go to them thinking that they're cheaper, but ends up actually messing up their case even worse. Or major delays, something easy and quick ends up being a big, horrible mess. And so, yeah, that's my thing on what are we doing. We're being attorneys. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. I want to extend on that, what you just said, Cheryl. So, because we know that we have listeners that are all over the globe, and right now the conversation is grounded and being centered on the Los Angeles region, let's start with you. So, you mentioned the Immigrant Rights Law Center, IRLC. A couple questions. If an immigrant or undocumented immigrant needs an attorney, how can they find an attorney in their area? And then maybe if Shekinah, you want to chime in on this conversation as well, are there agencies that you know of that are doing similar work in other regions outside of Los Angeles that you'd like to recommend?
So I know there is a list of pro bono attorneys that are given to people who are facing deportation in court. You know, it's a list given to them, and the court will ask them if they want time to hire an attorney. And so there is that list. I can get you that list and get you names of people on there. And I have lots of colleagues, and a lot of us, like me, we're already tapped out in terms of our pro bono options, but not all of us are. So I can get you it with that. The good places to look at. So a good attorney is someone that you can fight with. So that could, because you need to be able to trust that person. You need to be able to open up your closet and show them all the skeletons inside it. So finding a really good attorney, it's going to be really, really important for you. And sometimes it's not the pro bono attorney. Sometimes it is, and you can luck out. I know Public Alliance. God, I'm forgetting the names of all the nonprofits.
It's okay. You could also give it to us afterwards, and we'll post it in our resources when we launch.
There are good places out there.
Shekinah, I don't know if you have any other organizations throughout the country that you might also want to recommend in case we have listeners or community members that want to tap into their regional network.
Yeah, I will say there is a growing number of immigrants' rights organizations and folks doing this work, which has been amazing to see. I can't name like all of them off the top of my head, but if you just Google Know Your Immigrants' Rights nonprofits and then the city that you're in, something will show up. I tried it with a couple of cities and I was like, yes, I know these groups have like good resources and are solid organizations. And I think the great thing too is if you reach out to them and they know of another organization that maybe like is focused on the Filipino community or whatever, like they will refer you out to those groups too. And so that's a way that you can find an org near you.
Thank you both for that. This is really difficult and challenging work that you both are taking up on the daily. Can't thank you enough for all that you do. And I wonder, because we ask all of our guests that come onto this podcast, what do you do to balance your work? You know, it's all very important and challenging where you're often putting other people first. What are your self-care and wellness routines? What do they consist of when you're not filling others' cups in your respective arenas? Let's start with you, Cheryl, and then Shekinah.
As you can imagine, my work is really very difficult. Not only do I do immigration law, but I also do family law, which is an emotional roller coaster. I handle a lot of restraining order, domestic violence restraining order cases. And so my desk is kind of like the depot for all things difficult and painful and sad and depressing. And my job really is to uplift my clients to continue to uh, help them to lean into that thing that was activated in them to go ahead and fight for their peace, to go ahead and fight for their security, and to go ahead and fight for that future of theirs that they want, a better life, whether it's through immigration or family law or whatever. And so for me to be able to do all of that and to have been doing it for over 17 years, I have a very extensive wellness and self-care routine. I mean, I really could not do it if I wasn't very intentional about my self-care and my wellness routine. Everything from meditating in the morning, in the evening, from doing yoga, to journaling, to reflecting, to morning mind setting, to evening reflection, to reflecting on the week, to doing my gratitudes list, to not just listing my gratitudes, but as I list them, to feel what it was like when I was going through whatever it was I was grateful for. And spending time with my family, my husband and my soon-to-be 15-year-old son, and having a really very intentional about balanced work. So aside from my work as an attorney, but also being part of, for example, Entrepreneurship Toastmasters. And while that group helps me to be a better public speaker, it's also a community of really badass Filipina entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial spirit in there. And that is amazing. And then I'm team mom for my son's volleyball team, so I get to do that for him. And then I belong to, when Trump 1.0 started, immediately my colleagues in the immigration law circle, we formed a support group. And that continued on this entire time, even when he was out of office, and especially now that he's back in office. So we meet once a month for 2 hours officially as a support group, and then it continues for another hour, an hour and a half informally once a month. And being able to build connections with my colleagues of all law background, to be supportive, being able to brainstorm with them, everything. It's just a lot, and I need every single piece of it. Of course, I have my own therapy, my own individual therapy. Some people say that, why do you admit that? And I'm here to say, let's normalize that. Everybody needs therapy. If I held it all in, I would explode. And I wouldn't be able to then approach my work with joy if I didn't. I wouldn't be able to approach my joy with hope and positivity. As hard as it's been, I never lose sight of the fact that we are stronger. Our side is stronger, that we are much more plentiful, that our hearts are bigger, our brains are bigger, and we're going to get through it. So, and that's what wellness and self-care does for me.
So powerful. Shekinah, senior organizer at Pilipino Workers Center, what do you do to stay balanced and to handle self-care?
My self-care journey, wellness journey has been a trick. Um, as an organizer, I think I am hardwired to think about all of the issues in the world, how they intersect, how to problem solve them. And that comes home with me, right? I wake up, that's what I'm thinking about. I go to sleep, that's what I think about. My husband's an organizer, so that's what we talk about, right? And it can be hard and almost feel like, oh, how, like, there's so much going on in the world. How dare I take a step back? How dare I unplug? How dare I take time for myself? But I've tried doing the all like stay in the struggle all the time, grind all the time lifestyle, and that did not work. That led to a lot of burnout, which then made me unhelpful in a lot of situations, right? And so, um, especially this year, like I think I've been getting better at it, practicing it. But especially this year, my husband and I set intentions for ourselves to actively take time to do things that bring us joy, that we have been ignoring or just, not setting aside time to do. So I've been writing like poems more. I started drawing with my husband. I'm really bad at it, but I found out I'm actually not terrible because I started doing some TikTok tutorials, and they helped. And even like Valentine's Day just passed, like being able to go to the beach and the ocean, and just be there with my loved ones and eat good food and take time to reconnect with the land has honestly been so helpful for me. I come from a family of farmers and fishers back in the Philippines, so I've been doing some native plant days actually with an indigenous school in Los Angeles, Anawakalmekak. If anyone wants to check it out, they do community land tending days. And so being able to do that and then just hang out with my family, video chatting my family, playing. Right now, my family's in the other room playing Overcooked, so I'm gonna join them after that. And those are some of the ways that I'm able to, yeah, just keep that joy so that I'm energized to keep doing this work.
And so, as we begin to close, how can our community reach you both if they want to schedule a consultation or appointment with you or have any additional questions after listening to this episode? Shekinah, why don't we start with you, then we'll go over to Cheryl.
Yeah, so you can find information about Filipino Workers Center on pwcsc.org. Also on our social media, we have Facebook and Instagram, and that's at PWCSC. And then if you have any specific questions about our Know Your Rights trainings, or we also do a lot of workers' rights work as well. So like wage theft intakes, just navigating the workplace. If you are someone is being discriminated because of their status, that's stuff that we can support with. You can email me at Shekinah, which is SHEKINAH at pwcsc.org.
Thank you.
And then me, let's see, the best way to find more information about Diaz Law Firm, that's the name of my law firm, is diazlawfirm.net. You can find us on Instagram and all of the social media at Diaz Law Firm Cali. And you can email me at Cheryl, CHERYL, at diazlawfirm.net. That's DIAZ, lawfirm.net. And you can call or text our phone line, 626-261-0402.
I also wanted to say final words. Is there anything else that you would want our community throughout the diaspora to know when it comes to knowing their immigrant rights and with allyship? Starting with you, Shekinah, and then Cheryl.
I realized when Cheryl D was talking earlier about protests, And when you had asked us about what folks can do in allyship, I was like, I didn't even talk about organizing. What kind of organizer am I? I didn't even tell people about that. My final thought is organizing builds community power, and it is necessary not just for survival, but taking care of one another and creating a world that hasn't been created before, and a world that we are thriving in, that everyone is thriving in. And so I'm going to plug PWC again, my org, Filipino Workers Center, because we're organizing our Filipino working class community, and also youth, so families too. But there are so many great, both nonprofits, but also grassroots groups doing this work. Find an organization near you that's aligned with your values, aligned with your theory of change, and organize. Because that's what makes the new systems, right? Like the systems that show all of the changes that we're looking for in the world.
And then I think for me, it's really up to you how you want to navigate the next 4 years and beyond, right? The fact that you're tuning into this podcast already speaks volumes about your concern, about your heart, and only you know what your capacity is. It's hard out there, and it's okay to step back. I kid you not, there was a long period of time where I really did not consume any news at all for my own sanity. And I was very intentional about that because I knew I needed to preserve my energies and my focus for the communities and the clients that I was serving and am serving. And so if you can't engage, it's totally fine. You have our permission, which you don't need, right? But be a good person. Take care of your little corner of the world. You do right by that little corner, and everything will be okay if we are all doing that. And if you have the energy to step out of your little corner, I encourage you to build alliances and link arms with people. And we don't all have to be strong at the same time. So we can take turns. And so there'll be days I'll be down, but Shekinah's got me. And there'll be days that Sheena will be down, but I got her, and so forth. And so, but all together, little by little, have heart that we are making progress. And I do believe in my heart of hearts that this is a meant to be moment. Our democracy is being tested. Our Constitution is being tested. We are being tested. This, to me, is a necessary battle. And I believe we're going to win. I do believe that. I do.
Powerful way to end our episode. Thank you so much. And thank you both again for talking to our community about knowing our immigrant rights and allyship. We both look forward to witnessing your journeys unfold as you continue to offer healing to our community. And we will continue to help share your upcoming opportunities as we stay connected in the partnership.
Thank you.
And to our community, for our next episode, as spring approaches, we will be bringing back from our triathlons and marathons episode board-certified adult and pediatric allergist and founder, CEO of Family Center for Allergy and Asthma in Rockville, Maryland, Dr. Gina Dapul Hidalgo, to open up our 5th season. Stay tuned as Allergies and Asthma will air on Wellness Wednesday, April 16. As we close, we'd like to acknowledge once again our guest speaker, Cheryl Deptowicz-Diaz of Diaz Law Firm, and Shekinah Deocares of the Filipino Workers Center. Our art director, Richie, our advisors, Allison De La Cruz, Rian De Los Reyes, and Zafo Tiologo, our social media strategist, Kathleen Torrio, our outreach manager and production assistant, Maya Custodio, our community partners, SoCal Filipinos, is Filipino American Life, Rising Filipinas, Therapy Night, and all of our community members for your shares and support. As always, we'll share more about our guest offerings on our Instagram stories and highlights for permanent access with any of their upcoming events. Be sure to follow us at Philippine X and Wellness on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Don't forget to continue to hit like and subscribe on our Philippine X and Wellness YouTube channel. Thank you always for believing in us. Be well, everyone. Continue to take care of yourselves and each other.
Maraming salamat.
Daghang salamat.
Salamat din.
Thank you, everyone. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you.